everybody. Today I just wanted to have a bit of a mention about LANTITE. So I have now finished my Masters in Teaching, and given that my video, one of the things that it mentions is a little bit of advice or information to prospective teachers. One thing I want to make a mention of is what LANTITE was like. So even though I did do it a little bit more than a year ago, yeah, I do have some interesting memories from the occasion. So as you probably know, there's a few different time slots when you're able to do LANTITE, and then you pick your time slots. I would advise doing the numeracy and the literacy pretty close together. That way you can study for both. I don't think any of them are really tricky enough to warrant having them be separate and having a big break between. Um, Given that you would have done things like year 11, year 12 exams before. Something like this shouldn't be anywhere near as intensive. And if you've done university exams as well, I know that in my masters across the two different universities I was at, that wasn't, something that was involved. We were supposed to have one at one point, but it was cancelled because of COVID. If you've done university level exams, this is going to be very, very straightforward for you. So just to go into them a little bit. So when it comes to let's start with literacy first. With the literacy LANTITE, I actually found this a lot trickier than I thought it would be, even though I think I probably took, about 50 minutes or 55 minutes to finish. But I'm often one that goes through exams quickly, which I would say if you're confident in your abilities, that's an idea. If you're not confident, particularly, take your time. There's no consequence for taking your time. It just means that you stay there for the whole exam. Across my previous studies, engineering and accounting, I always finish very quickly. It's sort of irrespective whether I did well or not. I felt like I would always show how much I knew in, a fairly quick time frame. It's a bit like the way I play chess. I play quickly, whether it's a good move or a terrible move, it's still done quickly. But definitely, if you're not so sure, take a little bit longer. Now, about the literacy test in particular, one thing I found was that the texts, according to my tastes at least, were probably the most convoluted and complex, and they just weren't smooth. They just weren't smooth to read. They weren't smooth, easy reading these texts. They were quite difficult to decipher. I did find them to be mind-numbingly boring and completely uninteresting. I found them to be a chore to sort of get through. And not just that, but the level of vocabulary that they had was actually incredibly high, I felt. And I definitely thought that it would take a little bit, in my opinion, of a super genius for somebody to do extremely well. However, going into LANTITE, doing extremely well is not the aim. The aim is to do well enough to pass. And to do well enough to pass, I think it was something like you've got to be in the top 30% of society or something like 70th percentile at least. Just because of the level of education you have, you're probably already going to be in that category. However, because I made mention that the level of vocabulary was extremely high, if you are not a native English speaker, this is going to be a very, very difficult test. So what I would strongly recommend, and a little bit I'll recommend this to everybody, find the hardest and most complex texts that you can and go through those texts. And every time you don't understand a word, look it up, write down the definition, become familiar with that word. Because even as a native speaker of English, and I've lived in a native English speaking country for more than 30 years, I came across words that I was unfamiliar with. And, I wonder if part of that's because I don't really read a lot of novels and haven't done much so in my adult life. I have read a lot of non-fiction information pieces, gone on my Wikipedia adventures, read a lot about sports. But yes, it's definitely not a super easy test. I think it's easy enough to pass, but I don't think it's that easy to excel. And I'm not allowed to say that much about the actual test in particular, but I'm happy to answer any other questions if you have any. But one thing I can say was they did have the word like superfluous in one of the questions. And again, I think I was around 33 or thereabouts when I did the test, years old. I had seen that word before, but it didn't come, to the front of my mind what the word means. And these are the sorts of words that we might see within some of these texts. Words that you might have come across a couple of times in your life, but you're not really using those words. But it depends on the person, like I've come across texts or oral conversation where people have used the word soliloquy. Now, if I had seen that word in the text, I would have been familiar with it, with the spelling and with the definition. But for a lot of people who haven't been exposed to such things, they wouldn't. But it's just about trying to decipher what you believe that these words will mean. So yeah, the things weren't really that difficult, but I would definitely stress have a look at something like, let's say, the Year 9 NAPLAN reading magazines. And if you have any difficulty with the vocabulary that's there, you're definitely going to need a bit more work to know for sure that you're going to be able to do well enough to pass when it comes to literacy. So that's what I would say about literacy. Like I've said, ask any questions if you've got any, and I'll be happy to answer them. When it comes to numeracy, I'm a little bit biased, I think, when it comes to the numeracy. So my background is engineering. So I had to do 5 university level engineering subjects in that degree. And then I've also really enjoyed mathematics through much of school. And then I did accounting for a year and, had a accounting mathematics subject where I believe I got 100% in the exam. I just found it super easy and smashed through it. I probably shouldn't have had to do the subject given I'd already studied engineering. But anyways, I've got a very, very strong background in mathematics, and hence that was my specialization for my master's. However, not everybody is going to have a background in anything like mine, and therefore it's going to be difficult for me to be able to say how hard it is. But I would have thought if you're pretty well confident with, let's say, Year 7 NAPLAN maths style questions, that you're going to be fine with this. So I don't think anything was really harder than Year 6 or Year 7 maths. There's certainly nothing like quadratics or advanced algebra or anything like this. It's just the basic principles of worded questions. The answer is going to involve at least one of the order of operations, of the main operations, addition, subtraction, division, multiplication. You just need to figure out which one. I think a lot of the questions were multiple choice, so it's not really that difficult. However, one thing that I would stress, and it's the same thing that I actually say to all of my students, knowing your times tables makes every aspect of numerical maths easier. So knowing times tables just makes things like that. Instead of, in a question where you would have to use a calculator or you're not allowed to use a calculator, if you know your times tables, you can get things instantly. And that means also things like if you know that a question says something about someone getting paid $20 an hour, they work 7 hours, 7 times 2 is 14. So because of that extra zero, 7 times 20 is 140. Yeah, just moving the decimal place 1 across and adding the 0 when you're multiplying by 10. These things just come a lot easier when you know your times tables. So I really stress that, you at least have a pretty decent handle on your times tables to be able to, make things a lot quicker and therefore give you a lot more time so you don't feel stressed. The other key thing that I think makes the questions so much easier is if you've got complete comfort in being able to move between decimals, fractions, and percentages. I see this as like the second most important thing for probably upper primary maths, and it definitely helps well into high school as well, and just in everyday life. If you're able to see that when they say something like, "Oh, so and so had spent 40% of his money," hopefully that that's 2/5, or at the very least 4/10, and therefore it should be actually fairly easy to figure that out in your head because you just have to divide by 10 to get 1/10, and then you multiply by 4 to get 4/10. And it's the same when they give decimals and things like that. For you to be able to move freely between them, it makes it so much easier. If the literacy was done in 50-55, the maths was done by me in 45 to 50. But I was deliberately sort of speed running. I just wanted to get in and get out. I knew that even a very mediocre effort by me would have been good enough to finish. I found no challenge whatsoever in the questions, but that's not what this video is about. It's got to do with what you're going to be feeling when you go into it. So I stress, make yourself comfortable with worded questions, what they're asking, being able to move between fractions, decimals, percentages. It just makes your life so much easier. If you look at things like, let's say, Year 7 NAPLAN questions, or the LANTITE numeracy practice questions that are up, or the ones that are in my videos, you'll see that the level of mathematics is not that difficult. It's just all about interpreting what they want you to do. Once you can see what they want you to do, it's probably not that difficult to really carry it out. But again, it's going to be different for everybody. There's going to be some people with a little bit of maths anxiety and stuff like that that might be a little bit concerned. Don't be that concerned. It's not too bad. With a bit of practice and just making sure that you use the most of your time. Don't just spend heaps of time on one question. Just leave it and go back. And in fact, I went very quickly through all questions, but there was one question I looked at for about 20 or 30 seconds or so. I didn't think that any of the answers were actually correct. So I just clicked one, moved on, and then by the time I got to the end of the test, that was the only question I had a query on, and I just didn't care enough. I just got out of there because, I wanted to get on with my day. But for yourself, if you have a question which you're not sure, just go back to it afterwards. Go through the questions that you know how to do, which if you're reasonably competent at maths, is going to be the overwhelming majority of them. Don't burn your time just trying to make sure you've got one question perfect, okay? You can always go back to it later. Maybe the next thing of interest, and last thing of interest, is getting your results. So it only took, I believe, a couple of weeks for me to get my results. So let's have a look. Let me just minimize this. So these are the results that I got for my literacy test. I've just got rid of the rest of my name and date of birth, so you don't see quite how old I am. You can see I did the test when I did the test. Hence my memory for some parts of it might not be perfect. But anyways, so as you can see, just in a nutshell, you've got the standard, this line over here, and you've got band 2, which they describe as above the standard. Band 3 is well above the standard, is it? Or clearly above the standard, and above band 3 is way, way above. Now, very surprisingly for me, I actually got higher in literacy than what I did in numeracy. But again, this doesn't really matter. You just got to do better than the standard. If you are a well-educated person in English and you went to school here, I think you're probably going to do quite all right in this. When it comes to if you were educated in your schooling in another country, a non-English speaking country, I would definitely stress that what you should do is be looking at the most complicated, most complex texts that you can. So looking at dissertations, looking at, novels, adult novels, and, fictional, non-fictional texts, like informative sources, like scholarly sort of articles. You need to be looking at high level things because that's the thing that's going to prepare you the most. You need to expose yourself to vocabulary that you might not have seen before, because there's going to be vocabulary that is tricky even for native speakers like myself. I wasn't 21 when I did this. I was in my 30s. I'd done a teaching English as foreign language course. I've been around a little bit, a few different fields, and there was a number of things that I hadn't seen, a number of words that I hadn't seen. Very, very diverse set of texts they have. So you need to do as much as you can to try to be prepared for it. But remembering, you don't need to excel, you just need to do well enough. So that was my literacy. And here is my numeracy. So as we could see, I got, about a third of the way up band 3. Some of my maths ones were lower than this. So overall, I was about the same. And I think these individual categories don't matter. It's about what the overall is. I am really unsure what on earth they were doing with the marking. I know a friend of mine got higher scores than me for the maths. I'm not really sure what's going on. Like I said, there was only one question that was of any difficulty whatsoever, I thought. And probably wouldn't have been that difficult if I maybe just read through it properly. But I don't know, in the look that I gave it, there was no... I felt like maybe there was like a wording issue, which is why the numbers didn't add up. But either way, I only felt one answer wasn't correct and everything else was fine. But as we can see, there's a bit up and down. not really sure what they're doing. I was really, really surprised by the result. But a pass is a pass. I had, absolutely no doubt whatsoever with my maths when I finished the test. Did I have doubt with my literacy result passing when I got out of there? Yes, I did, but not so much that I thought, oh, geez, there's a reasonable chance I failed. More so that I was thinking, my goodness, that was much harder than I was anticipating. Yeah, so you really need to have a go at the practice questions that they've got online. Get yourself exposed to the hardest text that you can to hopefully help you do as well as possible. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say. Hopefully this is helpful. And yeah, if you've got any questions, please leave it in the comments below. Thank you so much for your time.